Hello, and now we are going to spend a few minutes talking about identifiers. So first of all, an identifier is an attribute of an entity. We need identifiers in order to find particular instances of entities. For instance, think about Excel. Say you had a file full of customers. How would you tell Excel to find a particular customer? Well, the way you would do that is you would click on the search feature. You would type in, you would go to a certain column, preferably, and you would ask Excel to find a value. Now, if you chose last name and you typed in Smith, more than likely the search feature is going to be capable of finding more than one customer. So what we need, even in an Excel environment, so it's also the case in a database environment and an entity environment, we need identifiers so that we can tell the database management system exactly the customer instance we want. Now, you may say to yourself, well, if I had customers, I would use Social Security numbers. The problem with that is that Social Security numbers are personally identifiable information. So yes, they would uniquely identify the customer, but in a real world environment, you don't want to use personally identifiable information like that. So as far as identifiers go, there's really two schools of thought. There is one school of thought, or one extreme, that says all entities should have system-generated identifiers, or primary keys, what we're going to call primary keys eventually. Then there's another school of thought that says all keys should be based on existing attributes of an entity. So, for instance, obviously, I think you understand the idea of a system-generated key. Could simply be a number that increments for every entity's instance. So the first one would be number 1, the second instance of a customer would be number 2, and so on. The other school of thought would say, nope, that's bad design. What you need to do is, say, have a combination of first name, middle name, and last name. Because typically the idea that you would have two customers with exactly the same first, last, and middle name would be remote. So that's the idea of a key or an identifier that would uniquely identify individual instances of an entity. Simple versus composite, we can go back to the example that I was just using. If you had you could use Social Security number, which would be simple, versus composite, which would be a combination of first name, middle name, and last name. A candidate identifier would be an attribute or composite set of attributes that would also uniquely identify an instance of an entity, but you don't want to use it. So for instance, in that case, a candidate identifier for a customer could be the Social Security number. Certainly it does uniquely identify the customer, but you don't want to use it. Or in the case that you're using a system-generated key, you don't want to, the combination of first name, middle name, last name could be a candidate, but you're simply not using it, so that would make it a candidate to be an identifier. So quickly going through criteria, you don't want them to change in value, you want them to not be null. You don't want to use intelligent identifiers. So for instance, here at Hofstra, we use, for network IDs, we use a combination of an abbreviation of your department and your initials. And the problem with that would be that if I moved from one department to another, my ID would need to change. So that would be something that changes in value and would also be an intelligent identifier. And you want to substitute new simple keys for long composite keys in your design. let's just look at a couple of examples. So here's a composite attribute, which is the employee address, which consists of the street, the address, the city, state, postal code. Those are surrounded by parentheses, so that's the component attribute. The components of the attribute, so employee address would be composite attribute. Multi-valued would be the fact that an employee can have many skills. So not only do I know how to program Microsoft Access, but I'm also I know how to program in Oracle and SQL Server, and so you could have many skills. So that would be a multi-valued attribute, and a derived attribute would be the years employed, and you would get that from their date employed and current date, and that would tell you how many years that person has been here. So that's derived versus a stored attribute. So again, in this case, simple and composite identifiers. So simple would be just a system-generated student ID versus a composite, which would be the flight ID, which is a combination of the flight number and the date. And the last example is time stamping. So in this case, we've got a timestamp, which is the effective date, and then we can see that this attribute is both multi-valued and composite. So we have price history, which is the effective date, and the price. And that will end my topic on attributes or identifiers.